Okay, so we're going to finish our news stories this week with more adventures from John with his Oculus VR hardware, because new titles have emerged. You've got a couple of games here that you've been playing that you're really impressed by. So have at it, John.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, this week I also got a Quest 3 to
Oh,
test.
really?
So I've been testing this on the Quest 3 and the Quest 2. I want to do all this as part of like a VR headset showdown early next year. Just
That'd be
looking at
awesome.
all
Good
the
way to do it.
options and see what's what. But I'm really sold by this whole wireless VR thing, as I said last week. It makes such a difference in terms of just freedom of movement and really getting immersed. And there's two things that I played. One of them is older, but kind of a side quest thing, if you know what I mean, which I'll explain. And then the other just came out. It's Assassin's Creed Nexus VR, which is,
Okay.
I gotta say, it really surprised me based on what I've played thus far. It is an attempt at doing Assassin's Creed, but in VR, but it's a game designed from the ground up for VR, which,
Wow.
and so it's not the full scale open world style game of other Assassin's Creeds. In fact, it's much more mission based and kind of like a smaller scale, which actually is really appealing in that world. And it's the kind of game I kind of had wanted. It's the kind of thing I'd wanted to see them experiment with Assassin's Creed, right? Where you have like a more straightforward kind of design and less just wandering around. But even then, there are still large spaces to explore, and all the core features of Assassin's Creed have been replicated. So there's stealth, there's the combat stuff, there's just exploration, there's the Abstergo stuff, which, by the way, when you first start that up, is interesting because it uses the camera system on the Quest and sort of makes your world around you this like weird bluish tinged version of the world. And they overlay all this like 3D weird wireframe and geometry stuff and text floating all around you. So it kind of gives you the impression of being inside this weird space between the real world and the simulated world. And you're manipulating objects within this mixed reality
Huh.
space before going into the actual simulation. And I gotta say, adding like VR style interactions to the Assassin's Creed style gameplay really makes a lot of those actions you do in those games feel much more purposeful. For instance, like just little things like using the hidden blade, right? You hold down the trigger on the controller and just like extend your hand like this, and my goodness, it feels so good to actually just do that motion, and you feel the blade kind of come out of the wrist and just stabbing it into a guy. It
Oh
sounds
boy, John.
sounds ridiculous, but it feels awesome to like sneak up behind somebody, pull the blade out, and actually do that. And stealth is actually enhanced by the fact that, one, you have more awareness of your surroundings. You can physically interact with it. Like, you're crouched behind something. There's like a bunch of items on a table. You can just grab an item and throw it across the room to distract the guard. So it's a typical mechanic you'd see from stealth, but because you physically pick up the objects now and manipulate them, it somehow makes it all feel a lot more interactive. And even things like being able to peek through like cracks in a door or like around corners, like the fact that you can do this now physically in your
Yeah,
space
it's
is really
no longer
compelling.
omniscient third person camera, right?
Right, exactly. And then climbing is actually generally pretty fun in VR, I find. And the fact that, in a normal Assassin's Creed game, you're basically holding up and holding a button at the same time, and it just goes through the animations here. Where now you actually are looking around, trying to see, okay, what can I actually grab onto, and then physically reaching out and pulling yourself up these buildings. Which, by the way, it does have an option for people afraid of heights. I'm not, but when you do climb up to some of those higher buildings, it does feel pretty intense. And actually climbing up there again, it feels very immersive. It's very fun. You can still dive off the buildings. You can hold your arms out like in a T pose and hold down one of the buttons to like dive off into the haystacks. And it can be a little stomach churning, but it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's combat where you actually, you're physically holding, well, the controller, but it's simulating the sword in your hand with full motion. So when an enemy attacks you, you like hold out your hand to block their attacks. You're trying to parry and counter them by physically moving the sword in a 3D space and walking around them as well, which also makes that kind of engaging. So it's just taking all these different mechanics that you would have done with just a button press or an analog stick flick and like adding real physicality to them. And just this stealth feeling of like going up on a building, you pull out your blade, you actually jump off and you land on somebody and plunge the blade in. You pull out your bow, turn around and fire your crossbow at a guy. And it feels awesome when you do it. And the fact that it looks this good, like on the Quest 3 especially, the resolution is high. They seem to use a space warp, which means it's basically frame generation.
Yeah.
Right? So it's 45 frames per second native, reprojected up to 90 frames per second. There's some stutter I noticed in spots, especially early on, but that does kind of smooth out, but it's not too bad. In the end, it actually feels and looks better than what you would expect from a PSVR 1 game. And in fact, the game world itself looks significantly better than the older Assassin's Creed games, I would say. Like, it's not Unity quality and up, but it's certainly better than the original 4 AC games, I would say. Like, the fidelity is pretty good, I would...
That's impressive.
Which also impressed me. Like, the lighting's very nice. It's very sharp. The resolution is really high on the Quest 3, so everything's very, very crisp. And it just... I'm curious to see how it goes. And What's also interesting is because it's mission-based, they actually allow you to play as different characters throughout the different AC games. So there's it's 3 characters. You can play as Ezio. It has Connor from AC3, and then what is her name from what was it, Assassin's Creed? The one that came after Origins.
Oh, Odyssey.
Odyssey, yes. Cassandra.
Yeah,
you play as Cassandra from Odyssey. And it's those 3 different time periods that you get to explore as well. So, and they have slightly different weapons too. Like, some of them have the dual blades, for instance. Connor has that axe, and all that stuff plays into the gameplay. So, I'm still fairly early. I played the first couple hours, but I like it. It's the first time I've been kind of excited about something Assassin's Creed related in a while.
Okay. Cool.
And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is, I think it's from Team Beef, but this has been around for a while, but it's the Doom stuff, right? Using side quest on the quest line, you can actually load on your own applications and games or whatever you want, right? Away from the meta store. And, I knew that stuff like Quake, Doom 3, all this stuff is on there, Prey's on there. It's all good, but the Doom stuff in particular is unbelievably fun. It is so fun. They even have this awesome launcher that lets you just drop all these files in there, download some of them directly, and it's broken up into columns, like levels, weapon mods, music mods, all this stuff. So you're just clicking on with your pointer controller to select it, and you just go in there, and with the 3D weapons, just having full motion over your hand and shooting and being in a real 3D space, running around inside Doom. It's so much fun. It's very immersive, but it's just pure fun. That's really the way it is. It changes the way Doom feels in a way that is so fresh still today. And it just had me reflect on how awesome Doom forever will be. And I think, Alex, I said to you the other day that I think calling Doom the greatest game ever made is not an unfair thing to say.
No,
because
it's
of everything it
replayable.
stands for. And everything it's brought to the industry and just gaming in general. And this is just another aspect of it. And
Doom is infinite.
Geez, I had so much fun playing Doom in VR. And the fact that it's wireless like this, you can just put it to sleep, come back later, jump back in. All of that feels so good. It's so responsive. And I've had a blast with it. So I will say more about the whole Quest experience soon enough. I feel like I've been converted over to it, and it kind of makes it hard to go back to a wired solution at this point. I must admit. So,
wow.
And the thing about the Quest 3 is like the Quest Pro and the Pico 4, it uses pancake lenses rather than the Fresnel lenses, and that actually does make more of a difference than I thought in terms of clarity. With the field of view and the clarity of what you see through the lenses, it's pretty much clear out to the edge. Whereas older Fresnel style lenses, you kind of feel like where you're looking in the middle is very clear, but everything kind of in your peripheral is kind of blurred. And that's not really the case anymore. So it feels like wiping a layer of of film off of your visor in a way. It just opens it up. The only downside, of course, of the Quest versus screens versus, say, the PSVR is that it's LCD still, not OLED based. So you don't get the super deep blacks or the HDR stuff. But other than that, it's pretty solid. And lastly, I mean, I tested the hand tracking stuff, which I wasn't initially interested in, but I was surprised at how well that works. Where when you're in a 3D space, it just maps your hands into 3D. So the 3D model's hands move exactly like your hands. You can even do complex motions like putting your fingers together, like interlocking them, and it works. And so if you're like manipulating like a web browser in 3D with your fingers, like a touch screen, with the haptic feedback in the headset and all the visualizations and the way it maps to your hand, it suddenly does genuinely feel like you're interacting with a surface, even though you're just touching midair. And it's the first time I've ever experienced hand tracking that actually felt convincing, you know.
Okay.
And part of this is just, I didn't have an experience with newer hand tracking, and I think this is still pretty new for the Quest as well. But I always thought of like Kinect stuff, and that didn't work. That was terrible. This though, this does actually genuinely translate your motion into hand space. I let my wife try it, and she put it on and was just using the web browser like normal. She's like, yeah, I know, it's just like using a tablet. Then I had to remind her, like, yeah, but you're doing this with just your hands, not touching something. And then she's like, you're right. It's so natural. I didn't even think about that. So
very good going.
It's that kind of blew my mind. And there's even some games you can play with it, and I'm impressed, I must say. So the whole thing, whole experience is great. I'm now back on the VR train.